Thank you, Council. Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Dennis Rogero, Chief Financial Officer. Pardon me. Thank you for having me here today to finish presenting the fiscal year 25. Recommended operating and capital budget. You will recall, Council will recall, at your request, we are bringing this presentation and the mayor's recommended budget to you about 3 weeks earlier than is typical. Thank you. I appreciate that feedback again, so we can all have a little more time to digest, get down into the details, and trade some comments, questions, etc., back and forth in anticipation of our 2 workshops coming up in August. Our table of context, you see that on the screen there, fairly typical. We'll jump right into the operating and capital budget, then into our 5-year capital improvement program, or CIP, and finally our debt program. We're going to provide a relatively comprehensive debt program presentation today, complementing the comprehensive debt program presentation we gave you at the beginning of the year, around January or February, especially on the non-ad valorem plans for debt issuance, because those come from the general fund. So let's dive right in. And here it is. The net fiscal year 2025 budget for all funds is just over $1.8 billion, an increase of just over 3% compared to the current year. And those increases are primarily in the following categories. And of course, we'll have weeks and weeks to get into further detail. Higher salaries, higher healthcare costs, higher pension costs, inflationary costs. You know, the mayor mentioned the phenomenal, there's no other word for it, increase in costs associated with inflation following the pandemic, well, during and following the pandemic. Vehicle maintenance, we've had some discussions offline in our briefings about vehicle maintenance and the need to continue replacing vehicles. The additional community redevelopment area contributions every single year, if our revenues, our our ad valorem valuations go up, we can expect to contribute more funding to the CRAs. Some additional staffing, and we'll provide some detail on that in a moment. And of course, continuing the water and wastewater projects, primarily pipes. As we always do, we break out the major funds for you here, including, the 2 largest components, and they are always the largest components. I don't see that changing at about 3/4 of the entire budget. That's the enterprise and general funds, and we'll get into more detail in those right now. And here are the expenditure categories for those funds. The general fund on the left, you see over 60% of the budget going to public safety. Again, a very large component of our general funding. Primarily Tampa Fire Rescue, Tampa Police Department, but it does include code enforcement, but the overwhelming majority are police and fire. Central government, those are the support agencies that keep the city running behind the scenes, including my shop, Revenue and Finance, Technology and Innovation, Human Resources, Purchasing, and Neighborhood and Community Affairs. Well, I take that back. They're not so behind the scenes. They're pretty out there. Our Parks and Recreation Department and Economic Development, which includes the Tampa Convention Center. On the right, you see the enterprise funds. Those are those departments providing services to the community and charging separately and solely for those services. Again, what they charge in the enterprise funds can only be spent on what they do in the enterprise fund. They're run like a business. On the left, and as is typical, you see property tax revenues by themselves are insufficient to pay even for the cost of police and fire services. You see police and fire services in fiscal year 25, nearly $390 million. And over at the top right, you see our total property taxes are only anticipated to be, I say only, it's a big ticket, but not quite up to funding public safety, $354.2 million. But as council knows, but to reiterate, that's not the whole story. You see, after the nearly $54 million Community Redevelopment Agency component, what we have left, we anticipate having left, is a little over $300 million. So obviously, but it is worth reiterating, I think, every year, because I continue and probably will always continue in the community to talk to people who associate our general fund solely with property taxes. And of course, that's not the case. It's our biggest revenue. It's not our only general fund revenue. And you see, in and of itself, it will not pay for public safety. Our proportional component of the CRA contribution is going up this year. It is now about 1/5 of our property taxes for fiscal year 2025. Continuing with the general fund, here is our general fund balance history and our projections for the current year and next year. First and foremost, let me thank you all again, and I'm very pleased to continue thanking you for your very, very strong support of maintaining our fund balance. And as I will always reiterate, it's a very important component as we discuss our credit ratings. As always, to maintain that preferred ratio of 23 or 24%, as the budget goes up, the amount necessary goes up, and you see that reflected in the graph. As we plan and expect this, it still remains above our bottom line policy number of 20%, about $19 million more than our 20%. And 20% is healthy, don't get me wrong, but we enjoy and are very privileged to have a percentage above that. This consistency, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, paints a very nice, stable picture of our finances, especially our finances for those black swan events, for those unforeseen circumstances. Another reason we are viewed so strongly. The mayor mentioned the increase in revenues and the increase in expenditures, and we're providing a bit more detail here for those. The fiscal year 25 major revenue increases you see here at the top. Property taxes, a little over $20 million, which, I'll be the first to tell you is nothing to sneeze at, but it is noteworthy that this represents a 6% increase in our property valuation. Last year, it was double that. It was 12%. So an obvious slowing down in the housing market. Some would say stabilization, which isn't a bad thing, but in this particular case, it represents half of the increase we enjoyed last year. And you'll see that as a consistent theme, as the mayor led off with. It's a bit of a tight budget. You see at the bottom, we originally estimated at nearly $27 million, and we thought that was a conservative estimate at 8%. But it is what it is. Other taxes coming in at nearly $19 million, and this is nearly all associated with electricity revenues, our electric franchise fees, and our electric utility taxes, with just a bit of an increase in our communication services tax and our water utilities tax. So we'll take it. Charges for service increase is minor, but again, we'll take it, $3.5 million. This is from the convention center, parks and recreation, things like that. And finally, our miscellaneous revenues, again, much more detail provided in the budget and throughout the budget, but these include interest revenues, hurricane reimbursements associated with Ian and Idalia, for a total revenue increase of $57.4 million, which is healthy, but as you'll see on our, I think our next slide, yes, on our next slide, let's get to that right now, pretty much matching our expenditure increases for the next fiscal year. And at the top, pay and benefits increased nearly $37 million. As we've heard council say, as you just heard the mayor say, keeping up, expanding services, and maintaining a competitive employee body takes funding, and you see that here. 5 new positions at just under $1 million, so a very slight increase in positions at FTEs, that's full-time equivalents. The CRA contributions increased $3 million, we've mentioned that. PAYGO capital project funding, that is for the Tampa Fire Rescue Computer-Aided Dispatch, or CAD project. Simply maintaining services with the increased costs was almost $11 million in the general fund. no expansion of services, just to maintain, as you heard the mayor, the status quo. That's a chunk of change. A slight increased level of service, nearly $2 million, and some new services at nearly $1.5 million. But again, the takeaway is very little to expand what we're doing. And again, the mayor mentioned status quo. Speaking of those salaries, here are the anticipated salary adjustments for fiscal year 25. You see 4.5% for the collective bargaining employees. And for the non-bargaining employees, 3% across the board, with the mayor still deciding on directors' and administrators' pay increases. Our summary of position increases. I'll start at the top there. We always like to provide this historical emphasis because we do think, prior to the great financial crisis, we had almost 5,050 employees. We still have less than 5,000 employees. We view that as continuing efforts, and we're celebrating.
Please silence your cell phones. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, we view that as continuing efficiency and effectiveness improvements over the years, still trying to stay below that level when there was ample money right before the recession and the great financial crisis. You see the millage rate comparison here. Again, part of what we would submit is a fiscally conservative management style. We compare favorably, you see, to Orlando, St. Petersburg, and Miami in terms of our millage rates. Continuing to compare favorably when we get to the personnel population ratio comparison. How many employees do we have versus the population? We are second only to Orlando, you see in the light green. All the while, of course, and including these cities, I don't want to single us out, expansion continues to happen. Growth continues to happen. Demand for services continue to happen. So we think we're doing very, very well in comparison. Moving on to our grants program, you heard the mayor mention other sources of funding, and another banner year. You see it right there, nearly $76 million. And of course, you see the progress since we revamped our grant program in the year 2020. Very aggressive and ambitious applications, very aggressive coordination, both internally and externally, with other partners, with Tallahassee, with Washington, D.C., and you see it paying off. By the time this fiscal year ends, we anticipate we will have applied for over $250 million in outside funding. That's very, very aggressive. And it's very optimistic because we got a couple months, we're not going to get it all right. We never are going to get it all. But that doesn't keep us from pushing applications and requests for other funding. Moving now into our capital improvement program, and may I beg a little bit of indulgence from council on this note. We have a deliverable due to you. It is not ready yet. Councilwoman Hurtak, you will recall, we are going to provide you a summation of capital improvement projects and amounts that have fallen off since the current year, capital improvement projects that are staying the same, and new capital improvement projects going forward. Mike Perry and his shop, the budget office, have crafted a very, very nice draft. It's not quite ready yet. We're going to need about a week or so for that. So we worked very hard to try to have it to you today, but it will be coming very, very soon. But that doesn't mean I don't have anything to say about the capital improvement program. And you see it here, over the 5-year period, just under $1.7 billion of recommended projects. It remains very consistent, I think, with one notable exception, which I'll point out in a minute, consistent with our current capital improvement program. And those are wastewater and water. Aggressive, heavy emphasis on continuing that pipes program. One of the exceptions, though, is you see fire rescue holding its own at over 120, almost $126 million over that 5-year period. You heard the mayor mention the significant investment that we anticipate over the next few years in Tampa Fire Rescue, and that's reflected there. Highlighting some of our major projects, the comprehensive infrastructure for Tampa's neighborhoods. That is an ongoing project. It continues. We want to continue to reference that. Our PIPES program, as I just mentioned, it's many different components to it. It's as you know, it's a 20-year, nearly $3 billion plan, and that's driving. You heard the mayor mention some of the successes, and it continues to be successful. We continue to take in significant amounts of money and spend significant amounts of money getting things done. So it's a success logistically from a performance perspective, and this is important to us. It's a success from a financial perspective. We're not borrowing money and sitting on it and paying interest on money we're not putting to work. Into Parks and Recreation and Police. Athletic field lighting, the K-Bar Ranch Park, and the Guida House renovations. And into the police, the Howard Avenue Annex building. We've talked a little bit about that with forensics and impounds. Our mobility projects over the 5-year period, nearly $70 million. And you see it for resurfacing, et cetera. The mayor mentioned Vision Zero. And we'll get into a little more detail on this also. Technology and innovation, there's the computer-aided dispatch item I mentioned earlier, and of course the relocation of the solid waste department from Spruce Avenue to 34th Street at the McKay Bay Complex. These are the projects by district. Again, on the website, we have any number of different links for GPS locations, further detail, of course, as you all know, and access to our OpenGov system for what we feel is very, very detailed for those that want that information associated with these capital improvement projects. There again is the comprehensive infrastructure, I had a problem with that title, for Tampa's neighborhoods in District 4, the South Howard Flood Relief and Streetscape. And I do want to mention, you'll see it later today on your agenda, the West River Walk. Got a little ahead of myself. District 5, again, there's the West River Walk, the East Tampa Recreational Complex, and again, that comprehensive, I'm just going to call that neighborhood infrastructure from now on, because I don't seem to be able to get that. And into District 6, again, the neighborhood infrastructure project. Again, the build grant, the West River Walk item that you'll have later on today. The annex building for the police department, fire station number 9. The mayor mentioned the Sulphur Springs pool. I believe she mentioned the amount, but if she didn't, I'll reiterate it. Nearly $2 million for Sulphur Springs pool improvements. And in District 7, again, the neighborhood infrastructure project. Fire station number 4, the K-Bar Ranch. And finally, following our capital improvement program, because it is so intertwined with financing and bond issuances, we're going to roll right into our debt program. The mayor already mentioned this, but I think it's worth mentioning twice, and congratulations to the mayor, to city council, and to the departments for, again, outstanding credit ratings, really across the board. Goes hand in hand with big projects, and as the mayor mentioned, it allows us to do more because our interest rates, or our interest payments, are cheaper. We've had 2 credit upgrades since 2019. You see those in green. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, council, the mayor, and the community should expect nothing less. At the top, you see the issuer credit rating. That, for all intents and purposes, is our FICO score. S&P, over to the far right, you see, has given us the highest it can give. It's an outstanding FICO score for the city. Moody's and Fitch have given us the second highest. We will continue to try for the highest, but we'll take second highest for now. I'd like to talk a little bit about debt capacity. The subject has come up quite often, and we've tried to speak to it. We want to speak to it a little bit more. So we're going to get a little detailed here, atypically detailed from what we presented in the past. So as we talk about capacity, you see here there are a number of elements. And before I go on, let me state and credit and thank the outside team members that we work with. I've got a fantastic revenue and finance team, but we have a fantastic financial advisor. We have one of the best financial advisors, I think, in the Southeast United States. Fantastic bond counsel, disclosure counsel, financial feasibility consultant. So we have a very large, experienced, and intelligent team when we're coming up with what is the city's debt capacity. And you see here revenues. Historic audited revenues. I'm going to reemphasize that in the presentation because as we decide what the capacity is, the budget office, for instance, is normally all about looking into the future, right? What's going to happen? Educated guessing, all kinds of research. But when something as important as deciding what the city's debt capacity is, we need to look at what has actually happened. And that's what we look at, audited financial statements and revenues. Second, required debt service coverages. We're going to get into that a little more in a minute, but capacity bleeds into, hey, do you have the funding? Are you anticipated to have the funding to cover your debt service? And not only cover your debt service, but more than cover your debt service. And taking into account outstanding debt. We talk a lot, of course, around here about issuing new debt, but we are always, almost always, paying off existing debt that we have. So it's a dynamic environment, and it'll always be a dynamic environment, I think, for a city of this size and a city with these aspirations. The anti-dilution test. I don't want to get too wonkish, but sometimes it's unavoidable. This is done, as you see here, to protect existing bondholders. People, companies, whether it's retail, mom and pop shops, or organizations have made an investment in the city. We have borrowed money from them through bonds. They want assurance, justifiably, that we're not going to make poor decisions in the future that will jeopardize their investment in the city. And that is what an anti-dilution test does. It has to meet a two-pronged test. Again, we have to meet that minimum required coverage, which I'll get to in a minute, and we have to establish what is a maximum annual debt service. And what that means is how much are we paying every year? How much are we anticipated to pay every year? Because it's one thing to say, hey, we're going to issue $100 million over 30 years. We have to verify that we'll be able to make those debt payments each and every single year. And you see here, calculated by the financial advisor. We pay subject matter experts to do this using, again, audited financial data. It's not what we think is going to happen. It's based on what has happened in the recent past. Existing financial market data. You want to talk about dynamic. I think everybody knows by now the financial markets are nothing if not dynamic, especially in the last few years. So there are a great many moving parts. And it is a legal test. It is a legal test to ensure that we are complying with our bond covenants. And here is our anti-dilution test, the first test. You see on the top, our legally available non-ad valorem revenues. Those are our general fund revenues. I'll reiterate, especially for the public, non-ad valorem means non-property taxes. The fiscal year 22 amount, the fiscal year 23 amount, and our average. Our anticipated maximum annual debt service, including our projected debt, what we think we're going to pay every year for non-ad valorem, is a little over $60 million. The next line down, you see minimum debt service coverage is 1.5 times. We have to have at least 1.5 times, these legally available revenues in order to meet that first test. The last line, you see we exceed it significantly. We have nearly 6 times the coverage as opposed to 1.5 times the coverage. So that's the first test, which you see we pass easily. In the second test, you see the governmental revenues. The governmental revenues for fiscal year 22 and 23, and the average of just over $793 million. We're going to take out sales tax. We're going to take out stormwater. And here are the available governmental revenues. You see $735.5 million. Why sales tax? Why stormwater? Those are separate revenue streams. Our current maximum annual debt service, you remember that from the previous slide, we anticipate almost 60.5 million. The maximum we're allowed is 20%. We're 8%. That $60.4 million is 8%. So moving further down, based on our available governmental revenues, if we could, or if we wanted to, because we can go to 20%. Now, we're not recommending that, and I don't anticipate we will recommend that. That will bring you at the very bottom an annual debt service payment of $148 million. We anticipate much less than half that. So we have passed our second anti-dilution test. To recap, capacity is based on any number of things: financial market conditions, our required debt service coverage, our credit ratings. Again, credit ratings drive a great deal of what we're able to borrow. And again, the repayment of existing debt and issuance of additional debt. $148 million gives us a legal debt issuance capacity of non-ad valorem funding of about $1.5 billion. We don't anticipate ever recommending near that, but we could. Final note at the bottom, if someone anticipated issuing that much debt, it would affect the city's credit rating, right? There is a tipping point. And here is our non-ad valorem debt program through fiscal year 29. A very detailed, itemized list of what we intend to do, when we intend to do it from a financing perspective. And you see the fire stations at the top. We have that yellow box around those projects to indicate potentially what kind of bonding relief passing of the community investment tax could provide. Yes, the CIT, exactly, thank you. Also affectionately known as the CIT. As you know, I'm sure, the County Commission approved going forward yesterday. We won't know till November, and if it is successful, we won't receive the funding until this out year, 2026. But we do want to keep in mind, it has been asked by council members in briefings, and of course, we've surfaced it ourselves. Speaking of a dynamic environment, how can we leverage that funding or use that funding to relieve some of our debt or some of our bonding requirements? The Convention Center, Hannah Avenue Mobility, this is for the transportation around Hannah Avenue. We still have the final debt component for the Hannah Avenue City Center. TPD headquarters, we do need to do some work there. The Fire Training Simulator and Skills Tower, and of course the East Tampa Recreation Center at Fair Oaks. That is just the first page. Here's the second page of anticipated non-ad valorem debt. The Annex Building for TPD, 40th Street, Public Safety Training Facility, Housing Program Property Acquisition, Sulphur Springs Pool that I mentioned, we have another $300,000 non-financing to get to that nearly $2 million. Aguita House renovations and the K-Bar Ranch Park, we have outlined those in green to, again, surface and keep in mind they're pretty big ticket projects. Now, of course, when and if the CIT is approved, there are any number of ways we can go, but we do want to highlight some projects that could be relieved from a financing perspective by the CIT. The West River Walk, which again, council will see a little later on in this meeting. And we have highlighted in that black square all of the grant matches. Although we are very successful, in order to get money, sometimes you got to spend money, and we are going to finance, or we intend to finance, some of those grant matches. And wrapping it up from a capacity perspective, you see in green what we could borrow from a legal bonding capacity perspective and what we anticipate borrowing in blue. This is actually a very conservative graph because you see we leave the bonding capacity consistent at 1.5 billion. I believe just 6 months ago, we shared with you a bonding capacity of 1.3 billion. In half a year, things change. Our bonding capacity has gotten better. Absent a black swan event, I anticipate that our bonding capacity will continue to get better. But this will work for now, I think. 1.5 billion, again, well below that. I do want to point out some credit rating vulnerabilities because we do live in the real world. These are quotes from all three of the credit rating agencies. We've asked them, and we didn't have to ask them, they're happy to tell us, hey, what would happen or what could happen that would lead you to downgrade our credit ratings? And you see that here, a significant increase in debt. What we plan, we do not think, based on feedback from them and our financial advisors, will be defined as a significant increase in debt. A material decline in fund balance. Again, thank you, council, and thank the mayor for sticking to that fund balance level. S&P, you see consecutive years of structural imbalance. We haven't had that. We don't intend to have that, leading to material deterioration in budget performance and available reserves. And Fitch says, hey, a sustained weakening of pledged reserves or unexpected leveraging. We are leveraging, but it's within the bounds, and it's not unexpected. We absolutely expect it. Again, a little bit wonkish, but want to reiterate to council and the public that we do not think anything that we plan is going to adversely impact our credit rating. Council has seen a version of this chart before. We have updated for fiscal year 24. I would suggest concentrating perhaps on the purple line. The purple line represents nearly quarter-century history of what our debt has been compared to our budget. And you see continuing decline until around 2015, where it's pretty much leveled out. At the same time, of course, our budget has expanded dramatically from less than $500 million in 2000 to nearly $2 billion 25 years later. Our principal outstanding debt service, this is what we've got right now. I've said it before, it continues to be a very nice debt picture, a gradual declining. This is what we've got right now, no surprises, no balloon payments or anything like that. And moving to our debt service by bond year, we do have a balloon payment, but I'm going to explain that. You see, in 2029, I was remiss in not at least emphasizing that the green are our enterprise funds and the blue is our governmental. Again, a nice, smooth, declining debt picture with the exception of that 2029. And what is that? Well, you see the note there. That's the balloon payment for the bank note we just approved for solid waste and the waste to energy plant. But as you know, we're going to get rid of that balloon payment because we're going to roll it up into a 30-year bond when we finalize the debt issuance for the relocation of solid waste. What will that do? That'll make it nice and smooth again. But we do, again, full transparency, we do want to point out that you got a big blip in 2029, but we have a plan for that. And our non-ad valorem, pro forma debt service for fiscal year 25. We anticipate bringing this to council in the first or second quarter. You see there about $150 million interest, going to be about that. Interest rates historically, again, we've talked about this before. If you look back decades and decades, not too bad. Recently, pretty high. And you see that here, annual bond payments of over $10 million. We think this is a conservative estimate of 4.4%. I won't bother going down a rabbit hole of potential Federal Reserve decisions in the very near future on rates, but we think this is a conservative estimate. Moving into our water and wastewater, again, we've been concentrating mostly on our general fund, non-ad valorem. This is our water and wastewater. We anticipate coming to council in the next month or so for over $300 million in proceeds. Again, part of the PIPES program. Interest costs, for reasons I won't get into right now, are anticipated to be high compared to the proceeds, although again, we think it's conservative. The reimbursement resolution has already been adopted. I should state on the water and wastewater debt and the next slide, solid waste, we're going to come in again with a very detailed and significant presentation, again, regarding capacity, regarding what we anticipate doing and how that will affect us. And for solid waste, of course, about $130 million we anticipate for relocation of the headquarters from Spruce Street. Again, we're going to do a short-term issuance, and then we're going to wrap this one up with the other one for a 30-year bond. Thank you, Council. Speaking of indulgences, thank you for indulging me. I know it was detailed, but a lot of discussion has occurred regarding bonding and financing. I anticipate a great deal of discussion will continue, and we're happy to engage in that. But to the best of our ability, we want to make sure everybody's eyes are wide open and all the information is available. The next steps are CIP workshop, August 5th. And again, we'll have that product to you. Operating workshop, August 19th. We would ask City Council to request the following motions. The first public hearing on September 3rd and the second public hearing on September 17th. Mr. Miranda, or Councilman Miranda, we're going to get that detailed information to you, but here's a sneak peek of what's coming up. Again, we have to work around the school board and the county commission's public hearing dates. We are third in line, and that's where we have landed. The budget can be found at this at this link, and from there you can go into OpenGov, as you know, but for the public's benefit, any number of different tools are available to everybody who can access that link. We have hard copy budgets coming. Oh, we've got them coming right now. You're very welcome. Appreciate the feedback. We want you to have the information that you think is necessary for your comfort in making these decisions.
All right, Mr. Rogero, that concludes your presentation.
Yes, with one exception, I would be remiss if I didn't thank a number of people. Thank you, Council. I would certainly be remiss if I did not thank your budget analyst. Thank you, Ms. Kopesky. I certainly appreciate your input, our discussions, and your efforts, and the Citizens Budget Advisory Committee. They've already made their presentation to you. They have met extensively and frequently, so appreciate their efforts also. As always, we think this is a carefully crafted and balanced budget. There are any number of interrelated items in here, so making changes in one area is likely to affect a change in another area, as council knows. So thank you again for your time. Again, letting me get into a little more detail than is typical. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to take a 10-minute recess, and we're going to come back. We have a lot of people coming in for Police Officer of the Month, and then go to public comment. We are in 10-minute recess.
Thank you.